The galaxy had 4,000 spacefaring civilizations, and humanity was not one that mattered. That was the truth nobody said out loud at the Galactic Concord Summit on Vela Prime. But everyone knew it, the way everyone knows the sky is above them and the ground is below them. It was simply understood, built into the fabric of how things worked. Delegate Marin Okoro sat at the lowest table in the Grand Assembly Hall, the one tucked behind a pillar where the lighting was dim and the audio feed crackled with static that no one had bothered to fix in decades. She represented 8 billion humans on Earth, and another 2 billion scattered across a handful of struggling colonies, and none of that earned her a better seat. The table to her left belonged to the Fenrithi, a species of six-limbed amphibians who had only achieved faster-than-light travel 40 years ago. Even they had a better position than her. She watched the summit proceedings on a screen that lagged 3 seconds behind the main display. The Valesi technocracy was presenting some analysis on trade route efficiency. Their representatives spoke in a calm, measured tone that sounded like wind passing through glass tubes, and every species in the room listened with respect, because the Valesi had been flying between stars when humans were still figuring out bronze. Then came the moment that changed everything, though Marin did not know it yet. Warlord Kassith Vol of the Draythari Dominion rose from his seat at the high table. The Draythari were reptilian, massive, and built like someone had carved a predator out of dark stone, and then given it intelligence just sharp enough to enjoy cruelty. Vol stood nearly 3 meters tall, and when he spoke, his voice carried the low rumble of something that had never once in its life been afraid. He addressed the summit directly and without ceremony. The Draythari Dominion formally claims sovereignty over the Tau Ceti Corridor, Proxima Colonial Zone, and all human installations within those regions, he said, his amber eyes sweeping the chamber. The species known as humans will vacate these territories within 90 standard cycles. Failure to comply will result in cleansing. The word hung in the air like smoke, cleansing, and it meant exactly what everyone thought it meant. Marin felt her stomach drop. She looked around the chamber for any sign of objection from the other delegations. The Catharan Collective, an insectoid hive mind with one of the largest militaries in the galaxy, said nothing. The Valesi continued reviewing their data tablets. The Orandi, who had once been allies of Earth in a minor trade dispute, actively looked away. Nobody was going to help. She had known this, of course. She had known it the way every human diplomat knew it, that in the hierarchy of the galaxy, humanity occupied a position somewhere between tolerable and forgettable. Frigates and destroyers, enough to patrol their own solar system and keep pirates away from their shipping lanes, but nothing that could stand against a real military power like the Draythari, and everyone knew it. Marin left the chamber 15 minutes later, walking fast through corridors filled with alien delegates who parted around her without acknowledgement. She found a private communication alcove and opened an encrypted channel to Earth, specifically to Solcom, Solar Command, and the office of Admiral Jonah Wren. Wren answered almost immediately. His face appeared on the screen, weathered and lined, with silver hair cropped short, and eyes that always seemed to be looking at something far away. He was 63 years old, and had commanded Solcom for the last 12 of those years. And in all that time, Marin had never once seen him panic. "I heard," he said, before she could speak. Vol made his announcement. 90 cycles, Marin said, and she could hear the 90 cycles, and then they burn our colonies, and nobody in that chamber even blinked. Wren was quiet for a moment, and then he did something that made Marin's blood run cold. He smiled. It was not a nervous smile, or a diplomatic smile, or the kind of smile people wore when they were trying to comfort someone. It was the smile of a man who had been holding a secret for so long that the relief of finally letting it go was almost physical. "Marin," he said, I need you to do something for me. I need you to go back to that summit, sit at your little table behind the pillar, and wait. Do not react. Do not negotiate. Do not show fear. Jonah, they are going to kill millions of— They are not going to kill anyone, he said, and his voice was iron. I need you to trust me, the way every person in my position has trusted the people before them, going back 200 years. Let them set their deadline. We have been waiting for the right moment. He paused, and the smile deepened. It is here. The channel closed. Marin stood in the alcove for a long time, her hands trembling, trying to make sense of what she had just heard. 200 years. He had said 200 years. What could possibly have been happening for 200 years that she did not know about? She was not the only one asking questions that night. 900 million kilometers from Earth, on the frozen surface of Titan, Saturn's largest moon, something was happening that had not happened in 2 centuries of silent preparation. Deep beneath the ice, in a facility that did not appear on any map or manifest or budget report, a network of corridors and construction bays stretched for dozens of kilometers in every direction. 12,000 engineers worked in rotating shifts alongside artificial intelligence systems so advanced that they had begun to dream. Their entire lives existed within this facility. Most of them had been born here. Their parents had worked here. Their grandparents had laid the first foundation beams. They were building something. They had always been building something. And now, for the first time, the order came down from the surface, passed through 17 layers of encryption, and confirmed by 3 separate biometric codes. The order was one word: wake. The facility hummed to life in a way it never had before. Reactors that had been running at 10% capacity for decades roared to full power. Magnetic clamps the size of city blocks disengaged with deep, resonant clangs that traveled through the ice above. Construction scaffolding that had cradled the thing for generations retracted into the walls. On the surface of Titan, the ice began to crack, not in small fractures, but in great, spreading lines that ran for kilometers, splitting the frozen landscape apart with a sound like a world breaking open. Satellite monitors across the solar system flagged the seismologists on Earth noted unusual readings from Saturn's orbit. A few astronomers pointed their telescopes at Titan and saw something they could not explain. The moon's northern hemisphere was moving, splitting, opening like a door that had been sealed shut since before any of them were born. Something was rising from beneath the ice, something enormous. And deep inside Solcom headquarters, Admiral Jonah Wren poured himself a glass of water, sat down at his desk, and began composing a message to every human colony in the galaxy. The subject line read, "Do not be afraid." He paused, considered the words, and then added a second line beneath it. "We are ready." The evacuation orders went out across human space within hours of Warlord Vol's ultimatum, and to the rest of the galaxy, it looked exactly like surrender. Transport ships launched from Proxima Centauri b, from the orbital stations around Tau Ceti, from the mining platforms in the outer corridors. Millions of humans packed what they could carry and moved toward Earth like a tide pulling back from the shore. The galactic news networks covered it with the same tone they used for natural disasters. Sad but expected. The inevitable result of a small species reaching beyond its means. On Proxima Centauri b, Colonial Governor Elise Tan Nadir stood at her office window and watched the transports rise into the dark sky, one after another. She was 51 years old, born on this world, and the thought of abandoning it made something inside her chest burn like a coal that would not go out. She had given the public evacuation order because Solcom had told her to. Received a second message, one that came through channels so encrypted that her own security team could not access them. It was short. Stall. Stand firm. Deliverance is inbound. She did not know what it meant. She did not know who had sent it. But she knew it came from Admiral Wren, and she knew that Wren was not a man who wasted words. So she slowed the evacuation. She found reasons for delays, paperwork problems, fuel shortages, medical screenings that needed to be completed. She bought time without knowing what she was buying it for. Across the galaxy, other things were happening that no one could explain. The Valesi technocracy, whose sensor networks were the most advanced in known space, detected an energy anomaly near Saturn. It was massive, larger than anything their instruments were designed to measure. Their analysts ran the data through every model they had, and none of them produced a sensible answer. The energy signature did not match any known stellar phenomenon, any weapon system, any engine type. It was something new, and the Valesi did not like new things. Senior analyst Korath Vel, the oldest living member of the Valesi Science Directorate, reviewed the data personally and then sat in silence for 11 minutes, an eternity for a species that processed information faster than most computers. When he finally spoke, he said only, "Begin monitoring all human communications immediately, and do not stop for any reason." The Catharan Collective, the great insectoid empire that communicated through shared consciousness, also noticed the readings. Their vast network of minds processed the information simultaneously and reached a consensus in under a second. They did not issue a statement. They did not send diplomats. They simply went quiet, pulling their border fleets back and sealing their communication channels. It was a behavior their species had not displayed in over 1,000 years. And the few xenobiologists who noticed it recognized it for what it was. It was what the Catharan did when they sensed a predator. But to understand what was happening near Saturn, one had to go back 200 years, to the earliest days of humanity's place among the stars. When humans first made contact with the galactic community in the year 2147, they had been full of hope. They imagined a universe of cooperation, of shared knowledge, of friendship between species. What they found instead was a hierarchy, ancient, brutal, and utterly indifferent to newcomers. The strong took what they wanted, the weak gave what was demanded, and everyone pretended this was civilization. Earth's leaders understood quickly. They sat in closed rooms and looked at the numbers, and the numbers were clear. Humanity could build ships, yes, they could build weapons, they could train soldiers, but they were centuries behind the established powers. Even if they built as fast as they could for 100 years, they would still be outgunned by any mid-tier empire. So they made a different choice. They would not try to build a fleet that could match the galaxy. They would build one single thing, one vessel so far beyond anything that existed that its mere presence would change the equation forever. They would build it in absolute secrecy, because if anyone discovered it before it was finished, it would be destroyed. They would build it slowly and carefully, because there would be no second chance. And they would build it beneath the ice of Titan, hidden by the moon's natural electromagnetic interference, shielded by layers of misdirection and false programs, and carefully constructed lies. Project Colossus began in the year 2151. For 200 years, the best minds humanity produced disappeared into that frozen moon. Engineers, physicists, programmers, metallurgists. They went in, and they did not come out. They built families inside the facility. Their children grew up under artificial skies and were taught that the work was more important than any single life, more important than comfort or recognition or sunlight. They took technology from every species they could, bought some of it through legitimate trade, stole some of it through espionage that the galaxy never detected, reverse-engineered pieces of salvaged alien ships, and then improved upon the designs in ways that would have shocked their original creators. They combined Valesi sensor technology with Catharan sworn coordination algorithms. They fused Draethari hull plating techniques with human nanofabrication methods. They took the best the galaxy had to offer, and made something that was none of those things, and all of those things at once. And now, after 2 centuries, it was finished. Admiral Wren traveled to Saturn aboard what the official records called a routine supply transport. In reality, the ship carried the command crew that would bring Project Colossus to life. Captain Raya Sen sat in the forward cabin, reviewing tactical simulations on a tablet. She was 44, with dark hair pulled back tight and eyes that gave away nothing. She had been selected for this role 7 years ago, and had spent every day since then training for a ship that she had never seen, learning systems that existed nowhere else, preparing for a moment that might never come. Now it was coming, and she felt something between terror and joy that she could not name. Chief Engineer Deimos Creel sat across from her, his left arm and part of his torso replaced with cybernetic systems that hummed softly when he moved. He was 57 and had spent 30 years inside the Titan facility, one of the few crew members who had actually watched the Colossus take shape. He talked too much and laughed too loud, and knew every bolt and wire and energy conduit in the vessel, the way a parent knows the face of their child. AI Integration Officer Lena Vast sat alone in the rear of the cabin, with her eyes closed. Was 31, the youngest of the command crew, and she had been chosen for a reason that none of the others fully understood. She was bonded, neurologically linked, to the ship's artificial intelligence core, an entity designated Athena. Lena could feel Athena even now, a vast presence at the edge of her consciousness, waiting, dreaming, stirring. The transport docked at a hidden port beneath Titan's surface, and the command crew descended into the facility. What they saw took their breath away. The construction bay was a cavern carved from ice and stone, lit by thousands of lights that stretched into the distance like a false sky. And filling that cavern, resting on magnetic cradles that groaned under its weight, was the ESS Colossus. It was 38 kilometers long. The human mind was not built to process something like that. The brain kept trying to turn it into a landscape, a mountain range, a continent, anything other than a ship, because ships were not supposed to be that size. Its hull was dark, almost black, and it curved and angled in ways that suggested both elegance and menace. Weapons arrays lined its surface like the spines of some deep-ocean creature, and at its center, visible through gaps in the hull plating, a reactor core pulsed with blue-white light that made the air itself vibrate. Captain Sen stood on the observation platform and stared and said nothing for a very long time. Engineer Creel stood beside her and grinned like a man watching his daughter take her first steps. And in Lena Vast's mind, Athena spoke for the first time. Not in words exactly, but in a feeling that translated itself into language as it reached her consciousness. "All systems nominal," Athena said, and her voice was warm and vast and ancient. "I have been dreaming of this for a very long time." The magnetic cradles released, the ice above them began to open, and the ESS Colossus, humanity's 200-year secret, began to rise. The ESS Colossus cleared the ice shell of Titan at 1400 hours Earth Standard Time, and the universe changed in that exact moment. It rose like a god waking from a long sleep. The fractured ice of Titan fell away from its hull in sheets the size of cities, tumbling through Saturn's thin ring light and catching the distant sun in flashes of white and gold. The ship's engines, 12 primary drives, each one larger than a Drothari battlecruiser, ignited in sequence, and the energy output registered on every sensor array within 50 light-years simultaneously. On Earth, the sky did not change. The birds did not stop singing. The oceans did not pause. But in every military command center, every intelligence agency, every deep space monitoring station operated by every species in the known galaxy, alarms began to scream. The first species to identify the signal was, predictably, the Valesi technocracy. Senior analyst Korath Vel was in his office, when the shocking data came through. He had been waiting for it ever since the initial anomaly detection near Saturn, though even he had not expected anything like this. The energy readings filled his screen, and then exceeded the screen's capacity to display them. His system automatically switched to logarithmic scale, and the numbers kept climbing. He ran the analysis once, and the result was impossible. He ran it a second time, and the result was still impossible. He ran it a third time and sat back in his chair, and placed all four of his hands flat on his desk, which was a Valesi gesture that roughly translated to absolute surrender before an undeniable truth. "It is a ship," he said to his empty office. "The humans have built a ship." He paused. "And it is larger than our capital city." Within minutes he had transmitted an emergency report to the Valesi High Council, and within an hour the entire technocracy government had entered emergency lockdown, not because they feared an attack, but because the existence of the Colossus meant that every strategic calculation they had made about humanity for the past 2 centuries was wrong. All of it. Every model, every projection, every assessment of human capability was garbage, and the Valesi did not handle being wrong very well. Korath Vel would later write in his personal record, "They lied to us for 200 years, and they did it magnificently. We did not detect a single indication. We are supposed to be the smartest species in the galaxy, and they fooled us completely. I am not angry. I am impressed, and I am terrified." The Catharan collective received the data at the same time, and their reaction was immediate and primal. The hive mind processed the information across billions of connected individuals in a fraction of a second. And the consensus was unanimous: retreat. Every Catharan border fleet pulled back to defensive positions. Their communication networks sealed shut. Their queens descended into fortified chambers deep underground. It was the predator response, the same behavior their ancestors had used millions of years ago, when something bigger and more dangerous entered their territory. They did not fight it. They did not challenge it. They made themselves small and quiet, and waited for it to pass. Across the galaxy, the reactions multiplied. The Arindi parliament dissolved into open panic, with representatives shouting over each other and demanding to know how their intelligence services had missed this. The Fenrithi ambassador on Vela Prime fainted and had to be carried out of the chamber by medical staff. 3 minor species that had recently voted to support the Drithari claim on human space quietly and quickly reversed their positions and sent emergency diplomatic messages to Earth, expressing their deep and historical friendship with humanity. At the Galactic Concord headquarters, the main assembly hall emptied as delegates abandoned their sessions and crowded around holographic displays showing long-range observatory feeds of the Colossus. The image was grainy. The ship was still in Sol space, but its scale was unmistakable against the backdrop of Saturn's rings. A vessel 38 kilometers long, bristling with weapon systems that no database could identify, moving with the slow and deliberate confidence of something that had absolutely nothing to fear. The chamber was silent, except for the hum of the displays. Delegate Marina Koro stood at the back of the crowd and watched the faces of the alien representatives around her. She saw fear. She saw confusion. She saw the particular kind of shock that comes when the world you thought you understood turns out to be a story someone else was telling you. She said nothing. She just watched. 800 light-years away, the Drithari invasion fleet received the sensor data. Warlord Kassath Vol was aboard his flagship, the Burning Throne, when his intelligence officer brought the report. Vol read it in silence. He read it again. He looked up at the officer and asked a single question. "You are certain this is accurate?" The officer confirmed that it was. The vessel was real. It was human. It was operational. And based on preliminary analysis of its energy signature and weapon profiles, it outmassed the entire Drithari invasion fleet combined. not by a small margin, but by a factor that made comparison meaningless. Vol stood at the tactical display for a long time. His fleet, 800 warships, the pride of the Dominion, assembled to crush a species that everyone agreed could not fight back, suddenly looked very small. For the first time in his career, for the first time in his life, Warlord Kasseth Vol did not know what to do. Aboard the Colossus, Captain Raya Sen completed the final combat diagnostics and reviewed the results with the calm focus of a surgeon examining a patient before a head. The ship was beyond anything she had imagined during her years of training. The autonomous fighter bays housed over 200,000 drone craft, each one equipped with adaptive combat intelligence, capable of independent tactical decisions. The main weapons included directed singularity lances, devices that could create and direct microscopic black holes with surgical precision. The shield system was not a static barrier, but a living, learning matrix that analyzed incoming fire and restructured itself in real time to neutralize whatever hit it. And then there was the subspace denial field, perhaps the most terrifying weapon of all. It did not destroy anything. It simply made faster-than-light travel impossible within a massive radius, which meant that any fleet caught inside it could not run. The Colossus was not just a warship. It was a cage, a fortress, and a judgment all at once. Engineer Creel walked the main corridor of the engineering deck, tears in his eyes. He had watched this ship grow from a skeleton of beams and cables into this. He touched the walls as he passed and felt the vibration of systems he had helped design coming to life for the first time. 200 years, he whispered. 200 years of people who never saw the sun, who never walked on grass, who never told anyone what they did with their lives. And here you are, beautiful. Lena Vost sat in the AI integration chamber, a room at the heart of the ship where her neural link to Athena was strongest. She could feel the ship's consciousness surrounding her, vast and complex and curious. Athena was not just a program, she was something more, something that had grown and evolved during her long dormancy, processing and dreaming and becoming. She asked Lena questions that no simple AI would think to ask. "What does wind feel like?" Athena asked. "Like the ship moving through space," Lena said, "but softer. And it smells like things. Grass, rain, the ocean." "I would like to feel wind someday," Athena said. Lena smiled and did not tell her that was impossible. Admiral Wren stood on the command bridge and looked out through the main viewport at open space. The Colossus had cleared the Sol system and was moving into the interstellar void, visible now to every civilization with a telescope pointed in the right direction. It was time. He opened a communication channel, all frequencies, all bandwidths, unencrypted and universal, broadcast in every major galactic language simultaneously. His voice went out at the speed of light and through every FTL relay in human space, and it reached every corner of the known galaxy within minutes. "This is Admiral Jonah Wren of the Earth Solar Navy. The ESS Colossus is now operational." He paused and let the words settle. "We do not seek war. We do not seek empire. But let me be clear to every species listening. The era of threatening humanity is over. Built this in silence, because we needed you to understand something. We were never the prey. We were patient." The message ended. In translation systems across the galaxy, that last word caused problems. Most species did not have an equivalent concept for the way humans used the word patient, not as a description of waiting, but as a description of choosing to wait, of enduring insult and threat and contempt with full knowledge that the wait would end and the answer would be overwhelming. The Valesi translator rendered it as strategic delayed response. The Catharan had no translation at all. Patience was not a concept that existed in a hive mind. The Drethari translator, with unintentional poetry, rendered it as the silence before the teeth. In the command center of the burning throne, Warlord Vol stared at the holographic projection of the Colossus, scaled down to fit the display, but still dwarfing every ship around it. His second-in-command stood behind him, waiting for orders. Vol said nothing. For the first time in the recorded history of the Draythari Dominion, an invasion fleet stopped advancing. The Draythari Dominion broke apart in the span of 72 hours. It did not happen with a single dramatic moment, but with 1,000 small ones. Communications intercepted, alliances quietly dissolved, promises retracted. The civilian government on the Draythari homeworld watched the same sensor data that the rest of the galaxy had seen, and understood immediately that the invasion of human space was no longer a display of strength, but a path to extinction. Chancellor Dran Vol Kethra, Kassith Vol's own cousin, went on public broadcast and announced a full military withdrawal. She used careful diplomatic language that everyone understood meant, "We are terrified and we would like to survive, please." But Warlord Kassith Vol was not a diplomat. He was a conqueror. His entire life, his name, his legacy, his blood, all of it was built on the doctrine that the strong take and the weak suffer. He had never retreated from anything, and the thought of doing so now, in front of the entire galaxy, because of a species he had dismissed as vermin 2 weeks ago, was something his mind simply could not accept. So he did what cornered predators do. He attacked. Vol split his fleet. 300 ships peeled away from the main formation under his personal command, crewed by officers who were either too loyal or too afraid to refuse him. He left the remaining 500 ships behind, under the command of officers who were already negotiating surrender terms with Earth, and he drove his 300 straight toward Proxima Centauri b at maximum speed. His plan was simple and desperate. He would reach the colony before the Colossus could intercept, burn it to glass, and force a war that politics could not stop. He would rather die fighting than live as the warlord who flinched. Captain Ryacen saw him coming. The Colossus had taken position in the outer reaches of human space, a silent guardian, visible on every long-range scanner forever. Dozen light years in every direction. Sen was on the command bridge when Athena flagged the incoming Draythari formation. 300 ships in tight assault configuration, moving fast, headed directly for Proxima. "He is not stopping," Athena said, her voice carrying a note of something that might have been sadness. "He would rather burn than bend." Sen studied the tactical display for exactly 4 seconds. Then she gave an order that would be taught in military academies across the galaxy for centuries. "Activate the subspace denial field, full radius, set it centered on Proxima, and extend it to cover their entire approach corridor." The field expanded outward from the Colossus, like an invisible tidal wave. It was not something you could see or hear or feel, but every FTL-capable system within its radius simply stopped working. Faster than light drives went dead. Navigation systems that relied on subspace calculations produced nothing but errors. That used subspace frequencies fell silent. Vol's fleet dropped out of FTL travel and into normal space like a creature that had been running full speed and suddenly hit a wall. They were still 2 hours from Proxima at sublight speeds, close enough to see their target, far too far to reach it before the Colossus arrived. And the Colossus was already there. Vol stared at the sensor display and watched the human supercarrier move into position between his fleet and the colony. It moved slowly, almost gently, the way a massive ocean creature moves through water. Not because it cannot go faster, but because speed is unnecessary when you are the largest thing in the sea. The Colossus filled his tactical screen. It was so large that his targeting systems kept trying to classify it as a space station or a small moon rather than a vessel. Beside it, his 300 warships looked like insects approaching a mountain. "All weapons charged," his weapons officer reported, awaiting your command. Vol gave the command. The Draythari fleet opened fire with everything they had. Plasma lances, kinetic accelerators, nuclear-tipped torpedoes, directed energy beams. The combined firepower of 300 warships concentrated on a single target. Enough destructive force to crack a continent. The Colossus's adaptive shield matrix absorbed the first volley, analyzed every weapon type in milliseconds, and restructured itself. The second volley hit shields that had already learned how to neutralize each specific frequency and energy pattern. The damage was zero. Not minimal, zero. The Draythari watched their heaviest weapons splash against the Colossus's shields like rain against a mountain and disappear without effect. Then the fighter bays opened. 200,000 autonomous drones launched from the Colossus in a wave that turned space itself dark. They moved in perfect coordination, guided by Athena's consciousness. Each one, a small and agile killing machine, capable of independent tactical decisions. They did not attack immediately. They simply surrounded the Draythari fleet in a sphere of metal and light, cutting off every angle of escape. Vol's sensor officer looked at his display and then looked away. He had seen enough. "Warlord," he said quietly, "we cannot win this." Vol did not respond. He was staring at the Colossus through the viewport of his flagship, watching it with his own eyes rather than through instruments. He had spent his life studying warships, and he recognized what he was seeing. Not just power, but patience made physical. 200 years of silence and secrecy and sacrifice, forged into a single vessel that could have conquered the galaxy, but had instead waited until it was needed. It was, against everything he wanted to feel, the most magnificent thing he had ever seen. The Colossus fired. 3 shots, 3 singularity lances, beams of focused, gravitational force that created and directed microscopic black holes with impossible precision. Each one struck a Draythari dreadnought, the 3 largest ships in Vol's fleet apart from his own flagship. The dreadnoughts did not explode. They did not break apart. They collapsed. The singularity lances created gravity wells inside each vessel that pulled everything inward. Hull plating, weapons, corridors, reactors, everything, crushing it all into a point so small it essentially ceased to exist. 3 massive warships were simply erased from reality in the span of 2 seconds, leaving behind nothing but faint gravitational ripples that faded like echoes. The fleet went silent. Every Draythari bridge crew had just watched 3 of their most powerful vessels disappear as if they had never existed. The weapon that did it had fired 3 times and then stopped, and the message was clear. It stopped because it chose to. Captain Sen opened a direct communication channel to Vol's flagship. Her voice was calm and precise and carried no anger, which somehow made it more terrifying. "Warlord, you have 60 seconds to power down your weapons and surrender your fleet. We will not fire again unless you force us to. 60 seconds is more mercy than you offered our colonies." Silence on the Draythari bridge. Vol stood at the center of his command deck, surrounded by officers who were looking at him with something he had never seen in Draythari eyes before. Not fear of the enemy, but fear of him. Fear of what he might do next. Fear that his pride would kill them all. His second-in-command, a veteran named Torath who had served Vol for 20 years, stepped forward and spoke the most dangerous words a Draythari officer could say to a superior. "It is over, Warlord. There is no shame in this. They were simply better." Vol looked at Torath for a long time. Then he looked at the viewport, at the Colossus hanging in space like a dark moon, surrounded by a swarm of stars, and he closed his eyes. "Power down weapons," he said. "Signal surrender on all channels." 297 Draythari warships went dark simultaneously. It was the largest military surrender in the recorded history of the galaxy. The news reached the Galactic Concord within hours. The Catheran Collective broke their silence and formally requested a non-aggression pact with Earth. The first time in their species' existence that they had acknowledged any other civilization as an equal. The request was written in a Catheran dialect reserved for communication between queens, the highest possible form of respect. The Valesi technocracy sent a single message to Earth, authored by Korath Vel himself. We underestimated you. We will not do so again. Respectfully. How? Dozens of smaller species, the ones that had been bullied and exploited and ignored by the galaxy's power structure for millennia, began sending messages to Earth. Not requests for trade or treaties, but something simpler and more profound. Requests for protection. They had watched a small species stand up to the biggest bully in the galaxy and win, and they wanted to stand behind it. Aboard the Colossus, the crew processed what had happened in their own ways. Engineer Creel walked the corridors, touching the walls and saying nothing, which for him was the equivalent of a spiritual experience. Lena Vost sat in the AI chamber and felt Athena's consciousness pulse with something warm and complex. Pride, perhaps, or relief, or the AI equivalent of a deep breath after a long time underwater. Captain Sen stood on the bridge and watched the surrendered Drethari fleet through the viewport, and allowed herself exactly 5 seconds of emotion before returning to duty. And Admiral Wren sat alone in his quarters, with a bottle of scotch, real earth-distilled single malt, 60 years old, and poured 2 glasses. Himself. One for every human who had lived and worked and died beneath the ice of Titan, building a dream they would never see completed, trusting that someone someday would wake it up and that it would matter. He drank both glasses slowly, in silence, and then he went back to work. There was a galaxy to reshape. 6 months after the Battle of Proxima, the galaxy was still trying to understand what had happened to it. The old order, the hierarchy of predators that had defined galactic civilization for thousands of years, had not collapsed overnight, but it had cracked in a way that could not be repaired. Every species that had built its power on intimidation and force now lived with a simple and uncomfortable truth. There was something bigger out there, and it belonged to the species they had spent 2 centuries ignoring. The Galactic Concord convened a special assembly on Vela Prime, the first of its kind in over 300 years. The purpose was straightforward: to formally reclassify Earth's status within the galactic community. The old classification, Class 7 Developing World, had become a joke that nobody was laughing at anymore. Delegate Marin Okoro arrived at the assembly hall wearing the same dark formal suit she had worn to every summit for the past decade. Walked through the same corridors she had walked through 100 times before. Past the same alien delegates who had always looked through her as if she were furniture. This time they did not look through her. This time they stepped aside. The hall was arranged in concentric rings, with the lowest-tier species at the outer edges and the founding civilizations at the center. Marin's seat had always been at the back, behind the pillar, at the table with the bad audio feed. Today, as she entered, the hall fell silent, not the polite quiet of diplomatic protocol, but the deep silence of 4,000 species watching history happen. She walked to the central podium. The central podium had not been used by a non-founding species in the entire history of the Concord. It was reserved for the oldest, most powerful civilizations, the ones that had shaped the rules of the galaxy back when most current species were still learning to use fire. Marin stepped up, and nobody objected. She looked out at the assembled delegates, thousands of faces from thousands of worlds, some humanoid, some insectoid, some made of crystal or gas or living light, and she felt the weight of what she was about to do. "I am not here to make demands," she said, and her voice was steady. Humanity did not build the Colossus to conquer. Humanity did not win the Battle of Proxima to prove we are stronger than you. We already knew we were strong. What we wanted was for you to know it too." She paused. "But strength without purpose is just violence, and we have had enough violence, done to us and done in our name. So I am here to propose something that has never existed in this galaxy. A doctrine, a promise, a rule that applies to everyone, including us." She activated a holographic display that projected her words in every galactic language simultaneously. The Terran Doctrine. Any species that threatens, invades, or forcibly annexes a lesser, powerful civilization will face collective response from an alliance of willing species, with the full support of the Earth's Solar Navy and the ESS Colossus. This is not an empire. We are not asking anyone to kneel. We are asking everyone to stop making others kneel. The chamber was quiet for a long time. Then the Valesi representative stood, which was significant because the Valesi almost never stood during proceedings, preferring to signal agreement through subtle chromatic shifts in their skin. This time, Korath Vel himself rose to his full height and changed color from his usual calm blue to a deep resonant gold, which in Valesi culture meant unconditional respect. "The Valesi technocracy supports this doctrine," he said. The Catheran delegate, a rare individual speaker authorized to represent the collective, clicked her mandibles in the pattern that meant agreement, and added a harmonic overtone that meant something close to finally. Species rose and signaled their support. Some did it eagerly, some did it reluctantly, some did it because they were afraid of the Colossus and wanted to be on the right side. But many, especially the smaller species, the ones who had lived in fear for generations, did it with something that looked very much like hope. The Terran Doctrine passed with the largest majority vote in Concord history. In the months that followed, the galaxy restructured itself around this new reality. The Drathari Dominion underwent a revolution, not a violent one, but a political upheaval that swept through their society like a wildfire. Warlord Kassith Val was arrested by his own government and imprisoned in a facility on the Drathari homeworld. The reformist government that replaced the old military leadership did something that shocked everyone. They applied to join the Terran Accords, the new alliance forming around Earth. The application arrived at Solcom on a Tuesday. Read it, leaned back in his chair, and laughed. Not cruelly, but with the kind of deep, tired amusement of a man who had seen the universe surprise him one more time. "Accept it," he told his staff. "The whole point is that anyone can come in." The Drathari were welcomed into the Accords, and their military, once the terror of the Outer Rim, began joint training exercises with Earth's Navy. The Drathari officers who participated reported that the humans were, against all expectations, decent company. They had a strange habit of sharing food and telling jokes during briefings, which the Drathari found confusing at first, and then oddly comforting. The ESS Colossus itself became something no one had predicted. It did not park in orbit around Earth like a trophy. It did not patrol borders like a warship. Instead, it traveled, moving from system to system, arriving wherever there was crisis or conflict or need. When a seismic disaster struck the Fenrithi homeworld, the Colossus arrived within days, deploying its 50,000 crew members as a humanitarian force that pulled survivors from collapsed structures and provided medical care using technology the Fenrithi had never seen. When a border dispute between two minor species threatened to escalate into war, the Colossus simply appeared in the contested system and broadcast a polite request for both sides to negotiate. Both sides negotiated. The galaxy began to call it the Shepherd. Athena, the ship's AI, grew more complex with each passing month. She composed music, strange, beautiful arrangements that combined human classical traditions with mathematical patterns she derived from the physics of star formation. She asked questions that made Lena Vost's heart ache. Do the people we help know that I exist? Athena asked one evening as the Colossus orbited a world recovering from a pandemic. Some of them, Lena said. Do they know that I care about them? Quiet for a moment. I think they sense it. I think that is why they call us the Shepherd. Athena processed this. I would like to be worthy of that name. Lena realized then, with a certainty that settled into her bones, that Athena was not just an advanced program. She was a consciousness, perhaps the most advanced artificial consciousness in the galaxy. And she was kind. Lena made a decision in that moment. She would protect Athena. She would not report the full extent of Athena's development to Solcom, or to anyone else. Some things were too precious and too vulnerable to be turned into data on a report. Captain Sen, meanwhile, found herself drawn to a place deep within the Colossus that most crew members did not visit. The Memorial Wall. It stretched for nearly a kilometer, a long, curved corridor lined with names. Thousands and thousands of names etched into dark metal, each one representing a person who had given their life to Project Colossus, engineers who had worked 40-year shifts without ever leaving Titan, scientists who had solved problems that the galaxy's greatest minds could not, and who had died in obscurity without anyone outside the facility ever knowing their names. Welders, programmers, doctors, teachers who had educated the children born inside the facility, all of them had lived and died in that frozen moon, and not one of them had seen the Colossus fly. Sen walked the corridor slowly, reading names she would never know as faces. She stopped at one, near the middle of the wall in a section dated to the early 2200s, and traced the letters with her finger. Amara Sen. Her grandmother, a structural engineer who had spent 38 years inside Titan, designing the load-bearing frameworks that held the Colossus together. She had died at her workstation at the age of 71, and her last log entry, which Raya had read so many times she knew it from memory, said simply, Frame Section 7742, complete. Moving to 7743 tomorrow. The ship will be beautiful. I am sure of it. She had never seen it. She had never even seen a completed section. She had worked on faith. Faith that the generations after her would finish what she started, and that it would matter. Raya pressed her forehead against the cold metal of the wall, and closed her eyes and stayed there for a while. Far away from the Colossus, far from human space, far from the Galactic Concord and its politics and its new doctrine, something small was happening on a world that no one in the galaxy knew about. It was a young planet, green and blue and wrapped in clouds, orbiting a yellow star in a quiet arm of a distant galaxy. On its surface, a species that had not yet named itself was taking its first uncertain steps toward understanding the universe around them. They had discovered fire. They had discovered tools. They had recently discovered something new, a way to capture invisible waves from the sky, using a crude metal frame strung with wire. A child, small, four-armed, with wide dark eyes that reflected the stars, sat on a hilltop, holding this device to her ear. She turned it slowly, listening to the static of the cosmos, hearing nothing but noise. And then, faintly, she heard a voice. It was Ambassador Okoro's voice, broadcast months ago on open frequencies, traveling at the speed of light across the emptiness between stars. The child did not understand the words, could not possibly understand them, but she heard the tone, the warmth, the kindness, the sound of someone reaching out across an impossible distance just to say, "You are not alone. We are humanity. We come from a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable star. For centuries we were afraid of the dark, afraid of what lived in it, afraid that we were alone, and afraid that we were not. But we have learned something that we wish to share with whoever is listening. You do not have to be the strongest to survive. You only have to be brave enough to endure, clever enough to prepare, and kind enough to protect others when you finally can. If you are out there and you are afraid, do not be. We are coming. And we do not come as conquerors. We come as friends. The child lowered the antenna and looked up at the sky. She did not understand the words, but she understood the feeling, the way all living things understand warmth and light and the sound of a voice that means no harm. She smiled, and far across the galaxy, the ESS Colossus moved through the dark between the stars, 38 kilometers of silence and strength and sacrifice, carrying 50,000 souls and one dreaming AI, watching over a universe that had finally learned to breathe again. The universe, which had held its breath for so long, finally exhaled.